The Manley Massive Passive EQ is unlike any other EQ you may have used. First of all, it's probably one of the most natural and open-sounding EQs you'll ever hear. It's hard to make things sound bad, even on extreme settings. Secondly, it functions quite a bit differently than other EQs in terms of its controls and layout. But once you get familiar with the basics, you'll quickly see why this boutique tone box is loved by engineers the world over. Let's look at the Manley Massive Passive EQ controls in detail. You can see which frequencies each band covers right here, and you'll notice there is some overlapping between the bands. This band covers 82 Hz to 3.9 kHz, while the next band starts at 220 Hz and goes up to 10 kHz. This is intentional. Now here we've got the boost and cut switch. So in boost mode, the gain control will boost the selected frequency from 0 to 20 dB, but switch it into cut mode, and now we're cutting 0 to 20 dB, so it works differently from other EQs. The filter type can be switched from shelf to bell. When in shelf mode, we refer to these shelving symbols here on the bandwidth control. Set all the way to the left and you've got a standard shelf, but as you move to the right, you get what we call the reciprocal cut, which you'll be able to hear a little later in the video, but I can demonstrate on the Cambridge EQ here. Here's what the standard shelf looks like, and as I adjust the Q, you can see this dip right by the corner frequency, and that comes in handy when you want to boost the low end, for example, but clean up some of the low-mid frequencies that build up. In bell mode, the band acts just like a typical parametric EQ band. So you refer to these symbols here on the bandwidth control, and once again, referring to the Cambridge, it means that the bandwidth gets wider or more narrow. And of course you have the frequency selection control. All these controls are repeated on the other three bands, and that brings us to the high-pass filters and the low-pass filters. You also get 6 dB of cut and up to 4 dB of output gain. If you're doing a lot of boosting, then you might want to cut a bit of gain to match, and if you're cutting a lot, you might want to boost the output gain a little bit. This switch here links or unlinks the channels if it's being used in stereo, so you can adjust each band independently. And then there's the power switch. So let's start using the Massive Passive EQ on some tracks. First I'm going to start with the snare track, and as you can hear it's a little dull sounding. So I'm going to use the upper mid-range band in boost mode, set the frequency to 3.3K, and let's see how that sounds. Even with a pretty radical EQ boost, it still sounds smooth. Now let's move on to the overheads. On the overheads, I wanted to boost the high frequencies and cut out the low frequencies. I could put this band in cut mode to reduce those low frequencies, but I think I'll use the high-pass filters instead. Then with a high shelf set to 12K, I'm going to give it a nice boost. Now the highs are getting boosted a bit too much, so I'm going to adjust the Q so I can get that dip right in front of the shelf to reduce the highs right there a bit. Now onto the drum group. I want to boost the low end again first with a shelf, so we're going to boost the gain at 100 Hz. Now that's a bit too much, but I'm going to adjust the Q again to get that dip right by the corner frequency. Sounds good there. Now I want to try to bring out the snare just a bit more. So I'm going to set this band to boost at about 3K in bell mode with a fairly tight cue. And that brings out a little more snare. I also want to bring out a little bit more high end, so I'm going to put this band in shelf mode, put the cue right here so we can get a little bit of a dip. As you can see in here, you can crank the gain up pretty hard without it sounding harsh. Because what happens is, when you have a big boost here, and a big boost here, the gain on each band is not going to all add up, since these bands are all in parallel. So we're really getting 20 dB of gain combined. So maybe this band is boosting 3 or 4 dB, here about 5 or 6 dB, and this might be boosting about 10 dB here. And this is one reason why it sounds so smooth, because all the bands work in parallel, exactly like the hardware. The mastering version offers a gentler 11 dB of gain range. It's got all the same frequencies on the bands, except for the high pass. They go a lot lower, down to 12 Hz. And on the low pass, they go a lot higher, up to 52 kHz. I'm pretty happy with the low end on the overall mix, but let's see if we can clean up the low mids just a bit. So I'll put this band in bell mode, adjust the cue, and I think I'll start with 270 Hz. Subtle, but it's working. Now let's add some high-end sheen. I'm going to set up a high shelf starting fairly low, around 5K. Boost is a bit extreme, but you can hear the EQ working. Like the hardware, it doesn't sound harsh for that big of a boost. Let's back that off a bit. I can also adjust the cue to get that dip that helps smooth out large boosts a bit. I think this is a good spot right here. Let's see how it sounds with and without the Manley EQ on the master. As you can see in here, this is not your average EQ, and it's hard to make something sound bad with it. While the interaction of the bands leads to some unusual knob positions, the key here is to use your ears and experiment. You'll be glad you did.